think mindfulness is what's needed first.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm a little biased here, but I would say the same thing. All meditation is going to require that awareness and attention. It's, to me, a definite antidote to the distractibility that we're going through. So when I started seeing the benefit in those more challenging cases, then I knew they had a place in medicine. I've done this for years without any texting and all that. But there's no question that the engagement and the practice time will influence the benefits.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Mark Montalban, and I'm your host for this MindfulText Perspectives show. And today we have Gus Castellanos. He's been teaching mindfulness meditation for over 10 years. He's a retired neurologist and sleep specialist. He's a UMass certified mindfulness-based stress reduction teacher, mindfulness practitioner, and researcher. He's also one of our facilitators here at MindfulText. So Gus, thank you so much for being with us here. And to start things off, I'd like for us to define mindfulness and meditation. I know a lot of people have different definitions, and it's such a large topic. I'd love to start off with hearing how you'd like to chat about it this time around.
Yeah, and that's a very good question, because they often get confabulated, the mindfulness and meditation being the same, and they're actually not in the pure sense of the word. And certainly on a practical basis, they can be separated out. For instance, what we say is the analogy of meditation being like exercise. So it's an umbrella term. If somebody comes to me and says, "Hey, I'm exercising now," I usually will ask, "Well, what kind of exercise are you doing? Are you biking, running, lifting weights, swimming?" And just the same thing with meditation. Somebody says, "I'm meditating now," especially me as a meditation teacher, I'll ask, "Well, what are you doing? What kind of meditation? Who's the teacher? What's the tradition?" So that would be the word meditation. So it's a umbrella term, whereas mindfulness is a more specific term to a way of relating to the moment-to-moment experience, which includes mindfulness meditation. So mindfulness is a state we can achieve whether we're meditating or not. And that's to be in the present moment, aware of what's happening in the present moment as it's happening. And of course, we'll add things like being with a non-judgmental or friendly attitude. And there is, by the way, no one definition for mindfulness either. Going back to either the traditional people or the researchers, it does change. But they all have something to do with being in the present moment, paying attention, and being aware of where the attention is and what's happening as it's happening, and cultivating positive qualities that are on an ethical basis.
That's my favorite part of mindfulness, how it really pushes forth an idea of cultivating positive attitudes. I think the world can definitely use more of this type of training, and it's relatively easy to practice. So with that definition, we chatted about doing a quick guided meditation for all of our viewers here. So maybe if you could talk a little bit about what the next minute or so will be like, and then we'd love for you to guide us.
So this will be a very brief, it'll be just about a minute or so. Please don't do it while driving. When you're ready, if you care to join us, simply finding yourself in a grounded, upright position on the seat that you're on, allowing the arms to fall where they're most comfortable, and then allowing the eyes to close or lowering the gaze. It's always your preference, at least in my classes, to close the eyes or keep them open. And just take a moment to be aware of the sounds that you might be hearing. There may be lots of sound, there may be very little sounds where you're at. And bringing the attention inward into your own body and noticing the breathing. Allowing the breathing to happen on its own. Just simply breathing in and knowing the breath coming into the body, breathing out, knowing the breath leaving the body, breath by breath. The mind does wander already, which has happened, it's common, it's not a failure or a problem, it's just the mind doing its thing. Just gently and firmly bringing it back to the breathing without criticizing or judging yourself. To this brief practice, taking a moment to just congratulate yourself for this little practice. Whatever it is that you did here, be good with that. And when you're ready, lifting the gaze, opening the eyes if they've been closed, and returning your attention back to your environment.
As you were guiding us through that, I was just thinking about how there's so much data that the brain is processing. And for example, as you were mentioning to close our eyes, I was just like putting all my attention in my eyes. My eyes were twitching a little bit. And then my mind went to my heart and I felt my heart beating. And there are all these different things that we can be thinking about externally, internally, and your reminder to bring everything back to the breath was awesome. So thank you for that. Maybe we could deconstruct this 1 minute meditation that you did, right? We started off with our awareness and then we brought it back to the breathing. And I know there's this concept of an anchor. Maybe if you could spend a minute or two talking a little bit about the structure of how meditation is practiced.
Sure. And again, this is more along the lines of mindfulness meditation as opposed to, let's say, a relaxation practice. So it's important to ground the body first because, especially if you're new, you want to feel that sense that you'll be grounded. And sometimes I'll even say, as you feel that groundedness, you also feel supported so that you can kind of trust that you don't have to worry about what's going to happen here, particularly if you're going to close your eyes and you're not used to that in certain environments. So you're grounded and supported in that position. Start that way. And there's many different ways to start, but here I chose to open up to the environment, that you can bring your awareness out from your own internal experience to the external environment around you, and just being aware of that too. There's such a thing as sound meditation. And then we brought the attention in closer, picking an object, like you said, it's an anchor, part of the body to bring the attention. The breath is by far the most common anchor that people use to then focus the attention here and now on that object. And a practical reason to use the breath in the body is because presumably wherever you go, the body goes with you. So you have no excuses. It's not like you need to say, oh, I don't have my mat for me. I didn't bring this clothing, or I don't have this apparatus or this prop. You have that breath happening for you all the time. And you can just sort of pay attention. And I also, there is that little bit of getting out of your head. So it's very useful when you start getting into that rumination and everything happening in the head to just bring yourself down out of the head, even just for a moment like we did, to kind of calm and get grounded.
I love that. It's one of my favorites too. Just whenever I catch myself stressed out or thinking too much, just taking some time to focus on an anchor, like the breath or just my heartbeat. I think it's such great stuff. And there's a lot of science behind how that can be helpful for people. But before we get into that, I'd love to hear a little bit about how you got into all this stuff. Did you learn about mindfulness first, or did you learn about meditation first? And I know that you have a neuroscience background. How did that all flow together?
Yeah, actually, thanks for bringing that up, because most people just ask me how I got into mindfulness. But in reality, I actually came to meditation back in medical school, which was in the 70s. And what happened was I was in this medical school at University of Miami. And I remember somebody putting up one of these sort of after class guest speaker was coming to talk about meditation. And it was the 70s. And my mind immediately went, oh, yes, I know the Beatles went there. And there's this guy with a long beard, man, and I'm a cool person. Let me go check out meditation, what that's all about. Now, at the time, I wasn't quite sure that I was going to be doing neurology for a profession, but I had some interest in mind and things like that, more so than other body parts, by the way. So I went to the lecture, and what I found later came back to know that they were teaching us what was called the relaxation response that became famous by the Harvard psychologist Herbert Benson, which is a very powerful tool that was used in medicine. Herbert Benson sort of made popular the type A personality, the stressed out executive who has heart attacks, and using relaxation meditations were very useful. So I learned to do that. And I did that for when I was in medical school, very, very useful. But then when I hit my internship was very rough in the sense I was on call a lot and all that bit like that. So I got away from it and took up exercising instead, which I could call it some type of meditation, but it wasn't a formal practice. And I went along, and even with exercise, things were just getting more hectic when I started my practice of neurology and raising the family. And things started happening back in the, I was mostly in the 90s now, that looking back, especially with what's happened over the last 5 years, and particularly in the pandemic, the physician burnout phenomenon, it wasn't really talked about much in the 90s, but I had the typical, the three cardinal features of at least physician burnout: the exhaustion, the emotional exhaustion, because I tended to be a workaholic. The more I messed up, the more I felt bad, the more I stressed out. My go-to coping was to work harder, that perfectionism. And of course, that would make me more physically and emotionally tired. And then there's also the cynicism. I was just getting really, I had some problems with my partnerships. I had some problems with the HMO system and the malpractice system and all these other healthcare administration things. And it was really feeling like, I don't know why I got into medicine. What's going on here? I don't feel like I'm doing much for my patients. So the three cardinal features, but I didn't know that at the time. And being a superior intellectual doctor that knows everything, I decided to kind of help myself to some of things, like some of the prescription drugs that I had to try and relieve myself and get me through. So between, misusing those pills and working more, I was starting to make everything a lot worse, coping in the wrong habit. And coincidentally, I was being asked by my wife and people, you should get some help here. You probably should talk to a therapist. But I was like, no, I know what I'm doing. And it was in 1998 when my friend, a internist, internal medicine doctor, brought mindfulness in the form of the mindfulness-based stress reduction program to the hospital I worked at, where I was the senior neurologist and the head of the sleep center and such. And he asked me to send patients. Actually, what he said, send patients. And I said, no, I don't send patients. That's a woo-woo thing. Mindfulness? No. My patients are good. I'm a good doctor. I don't do that kind of stuff. And then he pointed to the research at that point. So in 1998, there was plenty of research already. As you know, mindfulness-based stress reduction comes from the University of Massachusetts School of Medicine. And it was founded in 1979. So by 1998, there was enough research, and I was convinced, and I needed help with my patients. So I said, sure, I'll send the patients. And then my friend asked me to take the class because he could see that I was having issues. He was joining the class too. So I said, let's take the class together. We could use it. And that's when things really opened up for me. I developed a lot of self-awareness. And in 2009, somebody said, why don't you start teaching this? We'll get you trained with the University of Massachusetts, the Center for Mindfulness, where all this started. And I got hooked up with them, started teaching all around the area I lived in, South Florida. And things just kept unfolding and unfolding and unfolding. And this became my second career. And so that's how it sort of came out for me. And I wasn't looking for this, by the way. When I came to it, I was looking for relief of my own issues, never expecting to change, stop practicing medicine, and then also taking this up as potential job and career. So.
Wow, that's a lot of practice, and I'm sure you have a lot of knowledge that you can share with our audience here. One thing that comes to mind is, was there a moment that flipped a switch and was like, this is something that's needed in the world, and I'm going to put all my time into this? Just to share a little bit about my story on that. Sometime in my college years, I started to really pay attention to my thoughts. This is after my now wife had been working with me. We had just been dating for a year or two, and I was not mindful then. And slowly she had been teaching me about my own thought processes. And I guess it wasn't like an aha moment for myself. It was just a gradual reminder that step away from your thoughts and just take a second to think first. And then all of a sudden, I don't know, it just popped that oh, wow, this is actually powerful. I don't have to allow my thoughts to guide me. I can guide my own thoughts and make my own decisions. And another thing that's coming to mind is how I started managing my thoughts is, I don't know if I picked this up somewhere, but I just started visually imagining negative thoughts and positive thoughts. And I would put negative thoughts into a box and I would just kick it off into the distance. That's probably some sort of practice or something, but it really helped me categorize, like, okay, I caught a negative thought in my head and I don't want to reinforce these negative thoughts. I'm just going to put it into a box and like visually toss it somewhere. So that's a little bit of how I started to manage my thoughts. And it's taken me a few years actually to really cut down the amount of negative thoughts that were happening and really allow more positive thoughts to come through.
Yeah, that's a great story. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, and that I think is, you may or may not have heard it from somebody, but it's that sense that happens when we start paying attention and we see the usefulness of this thought and the harm the other thought does, and just that natural tendency to say, why would I want these, and where did it come from? If I had a choice, and then making the choice to get rid of that one. Yeah, that's great. And also, I want to make a quick comment about the wife thing, because the wives can be our good teachers for sure. My wife is the one that sort of prompted me to get this, and insisted sometimes, and then reminded me and pressured me. And actually, she's now, I would say, much more powerful meditator than I am, believe it or not. She spends 10 days in silence twice a year at least. She's going for 20 days coming up soon. So it's also, it's good that we've been married 40 years, and it's good to have a partner that does the same thing. That's really been beneficial. It really does ground me in my practice. It's hard not to remember to do it when I'm watching her do it 2 hours a day. And so getting back to your question was something along the lines of, was there a moment where maybe I could see that? So I can say that when I was practicing medicine and I went through the experience and started referring patients. Now, you may or may not know much about neurology, but we deal with a lot of chronic illnesses that you can't really, I don't want to say it in a bad way, we don't help too much. Somebody has a stroke or Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, we can sort of symptomatically reduce their symptoms a little bit, but the disease progresses. It's not like you have a cold or pneumonia, you give some antibiotics and you're done with it and back to normal. So a lot of chronic illnesses, and I was running sleep centers, and so I had a lot of chronic insomnia. So when I started seeing the benefit in those more challenging cases, and then I knew they had a place in medicine. Though I still didn't know the real power. I just thought it was okay. We traditional doctors tried everything, it didn't work. Go out there and give that sort of last resort thing. Now I know better, but I could see something at that point. And so then I went along, and then when I started teaching in 2009, mindfulness was still not well known. It was struggled to get people into the classes and to do the introductions to whatever corporation I would go into, or hospital, or a church group or yoga studio. I had to really, I spent hours and hours and many sessions trying to explain to people what it was about, and me with a background of science and medicine, the medical background and the research, to try and convince people to come. It was hard and struggled to fill in the classes. One of the places I still teach, the very first place I taught was a integrative cancer care center. And you would think that they would, of all people, and it was still, it was easier to get people in those classes than other classes. And then suddenly in 2014 or so, there was this explosion, and Time Magazine on the cover, and 60 Minutes with Anderson Cooper, and Newsweek, and suddenly mindfulness goes mainstream. So here I am struggling to get the classes. I'm really developing a sense of devotion, not by choice. And suddenly, boom, it explodes. And now everybody, wait, I said, well, I'm going to do mindfulness. Let me explain what that is. And no, I'm in your class. I want to go in. I want to get in. You don't need to talk about it. And so the classes started feeling real easy. And that was going well, and it was very easy. And then, of course, there was an explosion of people calling themselves mindfulness teachers. And so now I had to be sort of not so much competing with them, but, then it was like I was having a class, and that guy's having a class, and that woman's having a class. And before you know it, everybody's teaching around town. And there was that little bit of spreading thin of the potential candidate. But that was okay for me, because I was inspiring to see. I'm a big believer, like you say, it's very beneficial for everybody. That doesn't mean everybody should be doing it, but it's great to be part of this movement. It's, to me, a definite antidote to the distractibility that we're going through at that level for sure, but also things like the stress, and now with the pandemic, even more obvious. And so I kept going, and and the more I helped the other people, the more my classes got filled. So I'm a big believer in this whole mindfulness movement, if you will.
I agree. And yeah, the thought that came to mind, or the documentary, is the social dilemma, and how technologies are not super beneficial to humanity at the moment, but tools like mindfulness and meditation are definitely working to help balance that a little bit. And I love that. And I'm glad that you are here to help push mindfulness forward and be in the movement.
Yeah,
So
if I can say something to that real quick, just
yeah,
I don't want to distract from what we're doing here, but yeah, I appreciate that, and sometimes maybe because your audience may be definitely younger than me anyway, but I watched in the '70s this whole aerobic and turned out to be a fitness craze when people were sitting around too much. They started, the executives and whoever, everybody was sitting around, so they needed to move more, and so there was a fitness craze. And then in the '80s, and the overeating and the junk food and the obesity crisis starts, and people start going on the nutrition craze. We responded with that, and then I'll attribute the stress that was building up in the '90s and the 2000s, and then with the recession and all that. The yoga movement helped with that. Lots of people turning to yoga to reduce stress. That was what I was hearing. This is great for stress and all that. And then the mindfulness comes in with like you say, the technology related distractions and all of that. So yeah, I'm saying that to point out that we humans do have, even though sometimes we really give ourselves a hard time for all the junk, all the bad stuff we do really have, we do respond. So I'm saying that partly because of what we're going through, these are sort of hard times of the pandemic, that we will come out of this, hopefully, but we should come out of this better than we started. So anyway.
yes. And a lot more organizations are practicing the use of empathy and focusing your attention and reducing stress. They all tie together pretty well. And I think it's a really smart decision that society is taking up this idea of mindfulness. And well, I think actually their meditation is probably leading the charge, but in my opinion, I think mindfulness is what's needed first before really getting to know meditation, from what I've experienced.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm a little biased here, but I would say the same thing. All meditation is going to require that awareness and attention, whatever it is, even if it's a compassion meditation or a yoga practice or prayer.
Piggybacking off this idea of the moment where it was a big game changer for you, was there a specific wellness teacher or influencer or person that you may have heard of, read a book of, or maybe even met in person that was the most influential for you?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because in my career in medicine, there's always a lot of people that came at the right moment, but then they were replaced by the next right moment person. So there's never, I look back and I say there's not one person. However, that said, there's no question. The second time I took that MBSR course, and it was in the early 2000s, the book by Saki Santarelli. And Saki was the sort of second, it was the right-hand man and the so-called co-originator, if you will, of the MBSR program at UMass, at the University of Massachusetts. And he came out with a book called Heal Thyself, and it dealt with the MBSR class. But in there, he introduced me to the concept and the story, it's a myth, of the wounded healer. And it was the first time that I was allowed to sort of be between practicing mindfulness and just saying, hey, it's okay to have messed up, and then pick yourself back up and get back on your horse, and you can do well. You don't have to have been perfect all that time. That whole bit about I can't make a mistake and this and that. So that book was very powerful, and just the concept in that book, let alone everything else it said, was really a game changer for me. And so that went along, and that was okay, and it just sort of stuck with me without, it wasn't like walking around saying, "Oh, Saki, what a great guy." But then when I started teaching, I was gratefully introduced to somebody who lived in my area here in Palm Beach, was connected with the University of Massachusetts Center for Mindfulness. He was a supporter of them. And that's how I got plugged into their system. And she actually introduced me to Jon Kabat-Zinn, who was sort of the pioneer of all of this so-called modern mindfulness that we're all familiar with. And I got to meet him a few times because many people would come to this person's estate here in Palm Beach, and so I got to sit down. He was very, very friendly and all that. And he just gave me that sort of sense of just being present and being okay, knowing that he was, well known and famous enough, at least in the mindfulness world. And yet he was just an everyday down to earth guy that just was just saying, this is all you do. And yes, it's a good thing, and do whatever. And then he would say things like, and you teach him and Saki would say something like, you just have an open mind and a big heart. And when you go out teaching, don't worry, don't get nervous about the script and the words and this and that. So they were great, those two. And of course, those two are the big pioneers of the program that kind of started it all, at least the movement in the West, and blossomed it out. So
we did some work together for the NSU mindfulness course.
yeah, it was great because so it was a course just to bring out Nova Southeastern University out of Fort Lauderdale, which is in my neighborhood here. I had met James Pond, one of the head psychologists there, and in my mindfulness travelings before, and it was in the middle of the summer, last summer during the initial year of the pandemic. Lots of stress, if you can imagine, in the students and all that. So he wanted to do a course, and then we connected with Jonathan Banks, the researcher, the attention and mindfulness researcher. And so we said, yeah, we can do it into a research project. And James said that he met you somehow. He says, we should do mindful text. And I'll be honest with you, I was a little skeptical. I was like, oh no, it's distracting. I've done this for years without any texting and all that. But there's no question that the engagement and the practice at time will influence the benefits that may come out of this. So we went ahead and we set it up, and it was, as you know, it was a research project. The 6 weeks I led the course, the classes. It was an hour a week, and in there I would introduce a meditation, and that would be the practice they would do for the week. But it's the reminders through the week and the little text they engage the people really seemed to help, and it was borne out with the research. I don't have the exact data yet because it's not yet submitted for publication, but there was a strong suggestion that the more people responded to the text and were engaged at that level, the better the results, including something that it was new to me. It was called the COVID distress scale. Improvements and reduction in their COVID distress was actually better. So, you would hope that had also to do with the practice time and such like that. So, very, very cool, very cool. And like you and I got together and we designed some of the texting and all of that, and it seemed to be well received by everybody. And to be honest with you, and now it makes sense because it was a younger crowd. It was college students for the most part, although a few of the staff and professors were in there. And to me, I can see how they're much more used to having the phones and having the text reminders, and they can just play around and click the links, where I'm still a little old fashioned with the emails, and they may read their emails and it's an email in the middle of 100 other emails. And so they ignore my email. They didn't get it. And it goes to their spam filter and all this nonsense. So the texting is a much better idea. And so I've been talking to other people about it, by the way. So it's
Awesome.
great.
Yeah. Email is insane. The amount of technology that's going into figuring out how to get in front of people with an email. Email is very packed with distraction. And that's why a lot of people are checking out text as well. So on that, I'm also grateful that it looks like we're going to do another study together, and I'm excited to see what results come from that. And with that, I also wanted to get into a little bit about more of the science behind meditation and mindfulness. I was wondering if you could help our audience understand how meditation can help people with burnout.
Well, with burnout specifically, and so timely, because not only is it the frontline healthcare workers which are dealing with the whole issue of COVID patients, and we're hearing about the long haulers. So it's not just in the hospital and then they're done. I mean, some of these people are going on, and it's new. But of course, school teachers, and of course, even people working at the grocery stores and all the other people. And so the cardinal features of burnout, like I discussed before, the exhaustion, usually emotional exhaustion, plus the lack of personal accomplishment, that sense of I don't feel like I'm getting much done. And then that sense of cynicism, sarcasm that comes with the personality becomes sort of depressed and upset with what's happening. But there are different levels, so not everybody experiences all that. Definitely what we've seen in mindfulness that it tends to help is the exhaustion most. It can help the other two features. So it helps the exhaustion, and in the sense that job-related stress. So burnout is a job-related occupation. It doesn't happen personally. Although you could say, I've been caring for a sick child or a sick parent, and I'm burning out from that. But that's technically not considered burnout because there's a personal connection, and you're doing it by being motivated, not because you have to go to work. So if you keep it with the occupational side, burnout is different than job-related stress, but they're intertwined in the sense that the more job-related stress there is, the more burnout, and the more burnout, the more stressed out you get. So the mindfulness practices and the meditation in general, any other meditations will help with the stress component, which again can help reduce the tendency to have burnout. And all of it will help the exhaustion. And this is where we really see the improvement, bringing that awareness and also learning to set healthy boundaries. It's really time to take care of myself. Back off. I need a break. I need a break to get away from this right now, whatever that may be, or else I'm going to be real dysfunctional. So.
Hmm. Yeah, it's such a topic right now that a lot of people are thinking about because of the pandemic. And it was actually being thought of before the pandemic. And now the pandemic has just really kind of forced people to think about, okay, how do we address this topic? And it's so intertwined with life at home and life at work. So it's interesting how these concepts are getting unpacked. And you did a great job of weaving through discussing that. And along with that, right, like there's the burnout side. Another big topic is how can we stay focused and decrease our amount of distractions. When I think of people trying to address distractions and increase their attention, at least for me, I was thinking about what tech can I buy to make me better? What nootropics can I take? What medicine can I take to help me stay more focused? But actually, now that I've been practicing mindfulness and meditation, I'm way more confident that this tool, mindfulness and meditation, is so much more powerful, at least for me, to really just be able to sit and focus on one thing. And I'm not saying that multitasking is bad, but the just practicing mindfulness and meditation has just changed how I work and so drastically. And maybe you could talk a little bit about how that how those intertwine.
Yeah, so I'll also share a little bit of my story too. Yeah, because I call them, I guess what people use as a word, brain hacks. I wanted the instant way. Um, and by the way, I will put in a plug for exercise. Aerobic exercise is really good for the brain and focusing. So you always remember that. And then, of course, the flip side, avoiding things that are not healthy for the brain. So overly getting intoxicated or chronic stress or physical abuse of the brain, obviously. But that said, I did go through, and I'm a caffeine. I'm Cuban, so I've been with Cuban coffee all my life. I still use it. In fact, when I sit in the morning, I wake up at 4:30. I drink my Cuban coffee first, and then I sit for a couple of hours. That's my practice during the pandemic. Um, and there is that tendency for caffeine, of course, to help arouse. So knowing that and knowing my background as a neurologist and trying to, oh yeah, the chemicals and the whatever cyclic AMP and the norepinephrine, whatever. You can find some supplements that can guide you this, and I kind of played around with a lot of them. But if I'm not training my own attention, just taking those things and then trying to do something was not helpful because, especially for instance with caffeine, you don't even have to over caffeinate. If you take some caffeine and wake up and then start getting distracted and start thinking a lot, it'll just take off and run on you. And so you don't have that opportunity to hold back. So, and yeah, what I found, of course, with mindfulness, the research I've been involved with at the University of Miami, which actually, as you know, collaborates with the people at Nova that we work with. I started working with them back in 2014, and we were doing shorter mindfulness practices for high stress populations like first responders and military and an accounting firm in the month of March to help them be able to focus. It was about the focusing of the attention using these shorter mindfulness practices, 10 minutes at a time, 12 minutes, I think it were. And it showed that research did bore out that under high stress conditions, the attention does not deplete like it does when you do mindfulness in these types of practices, like it does in people who don't. So we know that it can be trained. What happens to me though, after doing this for a while, I also started, I think some people do kind of give up after a while. They'll see the benefit and then they'll keep practicing, and then their mind will begin wandering again and it becomes harder, is sometimes the efforting is too much. If you effort too much, it becomes uncomfortable, and then there's a subtle or maybe not so subtle resistance to doing the practices. So I found how to balance. It's the right effort concept. How to balance that right amount of efforting, so then it becomes more natural and eventually effortless. The brain is actually being trained, and the less efforting and the less striving and the less forcing the concentration kind of thing, the more it will go that way. And like we were mentioning before about the more pleasant stuff, then you start sticking with more pleasant. So it becomes a more pleasant practice. And indeed, the more you learn to concentrate in this way with this less of an effort, the more pleasant it is, the more you're likely to continue doing it, the more your brain is likely to be doing it on its own without you having to remember, oh, I need to focus now, or I need to, let me concentrate in this moment. It will just start happening. And whether you multitask or not, your productivity will tend to go up. You'll be making less mistakes. You will feel in a better mood. And so your day goes better, the next day goes better, and it sort of unfolds like that. So I do use a metaphor sometimes when people ask, what do you mean, how much the right effort? And something, this is the one I heard. It's like holding a small bird in your hand. If you do too much effort, too strong, you're going to hurt the bird, injure the bird. And if you're too loose, the bird will fly away. So you want to hold that right in between, and that's the gentleness of, but firmness of the efforting on the focusing, a relaxed centering of the focus on the object, the breath or whatever.
Wow, that was awesome. I really liked how you explained less. Can you repeat that again? Less efforting can, like, focusing less on the effort can actually increase the amount of ability to pay attention you have. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Sure. So yeah, so it's kind of hard to wrap your head around, and it'd be easier to say, why don't we do this for a couple of years and then you'll know for yourself. But I get that, because it took me a while to also, and I've heard from many different teachers, when they would explain it to me, I would also have it. So the idea is, when we start to concentrate at first, we come to these practices, I need to focus, I need to focus. So you're motivated and you're going to be efforting. And actually there's been lots of work done over the years on brain scan. The part of the brain that has to do with efforting lights up in novice meditators. In experienced meditators, and say drop into your focused attention practice, they don't have that efforting part of the brain. They just go into that meditative state, I guess if you call it, by brain scan, without that efforting, and it shows up on the scans. But the idea is that you use the effort at first to gain. There's the effort to remember to practice, and then the effort to stay focused, and then the effort to reduce the mind wandering and keep coming back, and more effort, and eventually you get good at efforting. And the more efforting you do, the more tiring it can get, the more irritating it can get. And so there's that subtle aversion toward, this is not, I don't know, something, I don't have time. You'll make up the excuses subtly, and or sometimes, no, I don't like it. I'm not getting something out of it. It's not working, is what I hear. So that's what tends to happen. So if we relax the effort after you get started, the brain and the mind will take care of it. In fact, it's just simple, sometimes setting the intention. I'm going to intend here to focus on my breath for the next 10 minutes. And then let the mind do its thing, let the brain do its thing. And so it becomes less irritating, less unpleasant. It becomes self-rewarding in that respect. You start noticing that you'll hit that point where suddenly you just sort of sit and it just happens. You're just concentrated. And you start thinking, wow, I didn't even direct my brain. It just went right into that. Just we're developing that muscle of attention, developing the habit. So
that was awesome. You are a library of knowledge in the mindfulness and meditation space. Thank you so much for being with us. What's the final thing that you'd like our audience to take away with to end our show?
Yeah, I encourage everybody to try it for themselves. You might hear me and other people say how great it is, but find out for yourself. And then also one other thing, sooner or later, get hooked up with a teacher or a group that can guide you, because if you're just going to do this on your own, you may be misled. And like I said, many people come saying, I don't like it. It wasn't for me. My mind was wandering. I failed at it. This kind of thing happened. That kind of thing happened. And that's perfectly normal. And if you're not getting direct feedback somewhere along the line, and I'm not trying to sell myself or us here, but just really just get yourself somebody that can give you some guidance every once in a while and direct feedback. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Gus. And thank you everyone for watching. We will catch you next time.
Thank you.